Welcome back. Apostle Patricia here from Divine Designation Ministry. Remember last time we spoke about development of the gospel that consists of 3 stages. The first stage being the period of Jesus' life, and the second stage was being the period of oral tradition, and the third stage is being in the period of evangelism. So today we are going to talk about the second stage. And the second stage is about the period of oral tradition. This is when the apostle and the disciples set out preaching, teaching, and speaking the good news. Again, it is hypothetical first stage in the form of the written gospel, as the information was passed by the word of mouth. The oral tradition includes the different types of stories about Jesus. For example, people told anecdotes about Jesus healing the sick and debating with his opponent. The tradition is also including saying the attributes to Jesus, such as parables and teachings on the various subjects, which, along with other sayings, form the oral gospel tradition. The supposition of such tradition have the focus of scholars such as Bart Ehrman, James Dunn, and Richard Buckham. Although each scholar varies widely in this conclusion, with Ehrman and Buckman publicly debating on the subject. So modern scholars have concluded that the canonical gospel went through 4 stages in their formation. The first stage was oral and including various stories about Jesus, such as healing sicknesses and diseases, or debating with opponents, as well as parables and teaching, as I said earlier on. And number 2 is the stage where oral tradition began to write down the collections, or you can say those miracles and the sayings that he used to say, while the oral tradition continues to circulate. The third stage is early Christian begin combining the written collection and oral tradition into what might be called proto-gospel. Hence Luke reference to the existence of many earlier narrative about Jesus Christ. The fourth stage is whereby the author of our 4 gospel drew this proto-gospel collections and still circulating oral tradition to produce the gospel of Matthew, Mark, Luke, John. Remember the New Testament. So Mark, Matthew, Luke, and John are known as a synoptic gospel because they are so highly interdependent. Since the 20th century, scholars have generally agreed that Mark was the first of the gospel to be written. And the author does not seem to have used the extensive written source, but rather to have woven together small collections and individual tradition into a coherent presentation. It is generally, though not universally, agreed that the author of Matthew and Luke used as sources the Gospel of Mark and collection of sayings called Q source. These two together account for the bulk of each of Matthew and Luke, with the remainder made up of a smaller amount of source material unique to each, called the M source for Matthew and the L source for Luke, and which may have been mixed with written or oral material. Most scholars believe that the author of John's Gospel used oral and written source, different from those available to synoptic authors: a science source, a revelatory discourse source, and others, although they are indicators that a later editor of Gospel may have used Mark and Luke. Oral transmission may also be seen as a different approach to understanding to the synoptic gospel in the New Testament scholarship. Current theory attempts to link the three synoptic gospel together through a common textual tradition. However, many problems arise when linking these three texts together, which is a synoptic problem. And this has led many scholars to hypothesize the existence of 4 documents from which Matthew and Luke drew upon independently for each other. For example, the Q source that I've mentioned earlier on. So the oral transmission hypothesis based on the oral tradition step away from his model and proposing instead that this common shared tradition was transmitted orally rather than through a lost document. Before I go further, you should know that all the stages are very, very much important. So next time we are going to talk about the third stage being the period of evangelism. See you next time.